the dreadful curse for my soul, for my soul, to bear the dreadful curse for my soul. When I was sinking down, sinking down, sinking down, when I was sinking down, sinking down, when I was sinking down beneath God's righteous frown, Christ laid aside his crown for my soul, for my soul. Christ laid aside his crown for my soul. And when from death I'm free, I'll sing on, I'll sing on. And when from death I'm free, I'll sing on. And when from death I'm free, I'll sing and joyful be. And through eternity, I'll sing on, I'll sing on. And through eternity, I'll sing on. What wondrous love is this, O my soul, O my soul? What wondrous love is this, O my soul? What wondrous love is this that caused the Lord of bliss to send his precious peace to my soul, to my soul, to send his precious peace to my soul.
Good evening. That was Nancy Geis, mezzo-soprano, singing What Wondrous Love Is This, a traditional spiritual, or Sylvia Olden-Lee would say a white spiritual, but which was also set and arranged by composers like Hal Johnson in a very beautiful a cappella choral setting. I thought that was appropriate as we are on the eve of the birthday of Martin Luther King, which was January 15th, but Martin Luther King weekend. And that's an appropriate leader to reflect upon in a moment like this. We have an extremely dangerous crisis, and as people know, if you received the email or read the discussion, we're going to be talking about the situation in Afghanistan, the fact that according to David Beasley of the World Food Program, 95% of the population in that country is food insecure. And the United States really bears great responsibility for this, given that we occupied Afghanistan for 20 years, we in NATO, and we were involved in a proxy war there against the then Soviet Union, starting in 40 years ago, really, or more than that. So this is an area which we've had a lot to do with. Now, many decades earlier, there was something called the Helmand Authority, like the Tennessee Valley Authority, where the United States, after the legacy of Franklin Roosevelt, was actually involved in building infrastructure, water management infrastructure, um, in the Helmand region, to develop the nation, based on FDR's conception that after defeating fascism, the world should also end colonialism and every nation should have its independence and have a full right to economic development. But unfortunately, the British Empire didn't want to go along with that, and they had certain co-thinkers in the United States as well, and we entered into the so-called Cold War for many decades until the Berlin Wall came down. And that brings us to where we are. What I first want to address, Helga Zepp-LaRouche has been very clear, and it is the case, and the Russians have been very clear, that the United States, our Secretary of State, James Baker III, had been very explicit in negotiations with Russia when Germany was to be reunified. And we promised, we gave our word that NATO would not move 1 inch to the east. Well, NATO didn't move 1 inch to the east. It moved about 1,000 kilometers to the east, about 600 miles to the east, and has now over a dozen, 14 or so more nations are in NATO than were in NATO before the Warsaw Pact was dissolved. And President Putin has been very clear that for us to be talking about putting military hardware, missiles, anti-ballistic missile systems, etc., in nations that are right on the border of Russia, like Poland, Romania, the Baltics, or Ukraine, if Ukraine were to join NATO, he said that is the equivalent of putting nuclear missiles on the border between Canada and the United States, or on the border between Mexico and the United States. You can imagine how Americans would feel about this, although it's even more extreme with Russia, because you have to imagine knowing that in Russia, 1 out of 6 people died in World War II from an invasion from the West, from the Nazis. So you're talking about bringing back an image of something which still is very much alive. Everybody in Russia has one or probably numerous family members who died in World War II, and they remember that. So to be pushing up against them in that way with very advanced weaponry, nuclear missiles, is a very serious provocation. And you have a situation in Ukraine where the Obama administration overthrew the elected government and brought in a regime which is sympathetic to the Nazi leadership of Ukraine during the time of Hitler, namely Stepan Bandera, who killed tens of thousands of people. You have groups like the Azov Battalion who have insignia that looks like swastikas on their uniforms. That's what the United States has been backing there. And the Russians have been doing military exercises on the border with Ukraine. They are not planning to invade, but they have said that if there is ethnic cleansing carried out against the Russian population in eastern Ukraine, in the Donbass, in Lugansk, that they will have to respond. Also, let me just lay to rest the myth that Putin invaded Crimea. There was no such invasion. Crimea is about 90% or more ethnically Russian. And when you have a regime come in that is burning people alive for speaking Russian, literally, I mean that, like as it happened in Odessa, Crimea held a referendum. They held a vote, and the vote was 96% to return to the Russian Federation. There was no invasion, there was no shot fired, there was no taking Crimea by force. Yet, in spite of this, people like Chuck Schumer, my opponent, have been supporting and imposing sanctions on Russia on something based totally on a lie. And we have many other lies, like the lie that Russia meddled in the US election and had a deal to get Donald Trump elected, for which they provided no evidence whatsoever, but somehow this lingers on. So we are in a very dangerous situation because Wendy Sherman, the Deputy Secretary of State, just met with Minister Ryabkov, who is the Deputy Foreign Minister, in Geneva to try and pull us back from the brink. But what's been said publicly does not sound very promising. Russia made very clear that under no circumstances could Ukraine become part of NATO. Wendy Sherman made very clear that the United States intends to keep the door to NATO open. Russia now is saying that if we move forward in this way, that they are going to send nuclear missile armed submarines to the neutral waters off of Venezuela or Cuba. Now, unlike the United States and NATO, which said one thing and then did something totally the opposite, I think the Russians are being transparent and they are trying to deliver a message which I'm hoping somebody in Washington will figure out, and we can pull ourselves back from the brink of a very, very dangerous situation. What's driving this is the looming collapse of the transatlantic financial system. We have been printing money, as people know, since 2008, since the bailout of that time. Trillions, tens of trillions of dollars. We are now experiencing hyperinflation as a result of that. And as any good physics student knows, or anyone who's ever played with soap bubbles, there has never been a bubble in history that did not collapse, either pop or implode. So this system is doomed, and there are some people who hope that by provoking a war or perpetual military conflict, something can be done to save this. Now, that doesn't account for the unbelievable crime being committed against Afghanistan, where after occupying the country for 20 years and propping up a leader there from the United States and propping up the country, we leave abruptly and suddenly the government falls. Ashraf Ghani fled. He didn't want to stay. And not surprisingly, people weren't prepared to risk their life defending a government that the United States was no longer propping up, whose leader hopped on an airplane with a bunch of cash and left. But to punish them, we have frozen the funds of the Afghan central bank and the New York Federal Reserve, causing horrible disruption, and we'll hear more from our guests about this, which is directly affecting the lives and livelihood of the people in Afghanistan. Now, given that it is Martin Luther King weekend, I just wanted to share a very short excerpt of a sermon that's in his book called Strength to Love. And he talks about midnight. The whole sermon is based on the story from Luke, a knock at midnight. But here he says, it is also, this is King, it is also midnight within the moral order. Midnight is a time when all colors lose their distinctiveness and become merely a sullen shade of gray. Certainly in the modern world, in so many instances, moral principles have lost their distinctiveness. Right and wrong in so many quarters are merely relative to our likes and dislikes and our appetites and to the particular community in which we live. And so we have reduced morality to group consensus. We have come to believe that you discover what is right by taking a sort of Gallup poll of the majority opinion. Everybody is doing it, so it must be right. This is the philosophy that pervades so many of our communities. And I think we see that today. There was a term in Nuremberg called depraved indifference, or people have heard the term knew or should have known when hideous crimes were committed and people looked the other way. That is what is happening right now, and part of this program is dedicated to reverse that. I understand that the Secretary General of the United Nations was talking today, this is just breaking news, reaching out to Blinken to try and figure out some mechanism to free up some of these funds. That would be better than nothing, but really we have to change the policy. So I'm not going to say more, excepting to say, as I introduce my guests, we have Farzana Niemann from the Farzana Foundation, a charitable group which is building wells in Afghanistan. Marcia Mary Baker, who is on the editorial board of Executive Intelligence Review and an expert in the field of agriculture and farming. And my colleague Joel Dejean, who is an engineer, longtime LaRouche associate running for US Congress in Texas. And as I wrote in the invitation, just to be very clear, participation in my symposium by any of the speakers does not constitute political endorsement of a campaign, of my candidacy or anyone else's, but we are having this dialogue for the purpose of educating the voters on the situation. So, Farzana, if we could go to you and you just tell us a little bit about the ground. And thank you so much for being here, because I think Americans don't have a chance to find out what's happening from the news media.
Hi, Diane. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much having me into your interview here. I was interested listening to you. I was born in Afghanistan, and I grew up in Germany, and I moved to the United States 10 years ago. And my mother and I were actually always helping poor people in Afghanistan over the war. And in Herat city, I was born in Herat. It's the second biggest city in Afghanistan. And we were planning to just somehow help these people. So mostly we realized that suburbans surrounding Herat city villages, there are thousands of people living there. There's no access to fresh water. I mean, that's the main things about the water. And there's nothing actually there, but the water is the most important part, because they're drinking dirty water somehow when they get it. But so we start 2017 collecting money in Germany in the family, and we started building fresh water wells there. So we built 35 of them, and we saw how amazing this work was and how happy these people were, and they wanted us to help them more. So this year, 2000, actually not this year, last year, 2021, I started having my non-profit organization to raise money for Afghanistan to build. So my family my mother lives in Germany. I moved here, but I grew up in Germany. But I was born in Herat. Her family, my uncle, my cousin, her uncle, cousin, family, 50% of our family still lives in Herat city. And so they are in touch with us every single day through WhatsApp. And the bad situation right now is the worst that it would ever happen in Afghanistan. The worst. People lost their home. People lost everything they had. They're living literally on the street. And my cousin, he's a journalist there, and so he studied there. He interviews people. He supports people. We try to support them in every way we can. We also prepare food for orphans, children, and children of war in Afghanistan, and many different things. We also start getting classes for them 2 years ago, before the American troop left Afghanistan, and we taught them English and tried to just prepare something that they have school children can study. And we needed more help, and I hope this Farzana Foundation goes more out there, people know more about it, and spread the world and bring awareness about this, how dangerous right now Afghanistan turned after the Taliban came into Afghanistan. In Herat is pretty much quiet comparing to Kabul, because Herat people are not so open-minded like in Kabul, people in the capital of Afghanistan. Sorry, my dog is a little loud right now, and I hope you can hear me. And so right now we are in a situation that people literally selling their children for 4,000 rupiah, which is equal to $43, to just for food, or just make sure that the child is in a family who has maybe a little money to take care of these children and give them a life. And on the other hand this is the worst. But unfortunately, I just had a conversation with my cousin in Afghanistan, and he mentioned things are so bad that foods that was before a piece of bread or like one bread, people eat in Afghanistan a lot of bread and rice and stuff like that. So it was, when it was 1 rupiah, now it's 20 rupiah. People are not even able to pay for the food. The people, they have money. And it's really, really bad. I get this call every day from my cousin, from my uncle, from my aunt. She lives in Germany. My mom said, Farzana, could you do help? We did have an event in December, and we raised some money, luckily, but unfortunately we cannot send money there. At the moment, I can only send $200 a day there. It's a very sad situation right now, that my country or people in the world, we have to see this and live like that. It's not only the things, it's also about women in Afghanistan, women rights. There's no rights for women at all. Women educated, been educated in the last 20 years, went to school, graduated, were teachers, doctors. They're not allowed to work. They're sitting on the street cleaning shoes for people, and they're waiting until they get $1, $2 a work day. Children don't go to school. They are 10, 20, 10 or 14, 15 years old. They work on construction for 80 cents a day, 8 hours. Other children, there are pictures that I have, if we can pull them up so people can see their children. These are original pictures taken by my cousin. He traveled to when there's 3 hours outside Herat city, and he took these pictures for us, and he actually carries food. In some pictures you can see that we delivered food for them. That's these families there. There's the ladies, the woman with the chador, and we could do as much as we can, and we send my cousin the money here, and he's taking care of that. But it's literally, he has to drive there with a car 3 hours to get to these people, and there are people living there. And as you see, some pictures are there, their children in the snow, they have summer shoes on. Or this gentleman right now, he broke his leg, he cannot even have money. People doesn't have money for surgeries there. There's nothing there. They just survive, try to survive today to tomorrow. I was surprised and already sad at the same time to see these little children walking around this water wells that we built it, and they were so happy. And I see my life here, my daughters, my life. I have 3 children, grown children, all in Germany, my family. How fortunate we are and privileged, and somehow that we take water totally for granted in the morning, and we want big gifts for Christmas or this and that. And these children there, they are so happy to just collect this water and to be able to have water to drink. This isn't happiness, a gift for them. It's like a Christmas gift. I see their faces because I raised 3 children. I know how children get happy when they get a gift. These children are happy. And that's all what I can do at this time in my life to support these children in Afghanistan. Thank you so much, by the way. Yeah.
Very much. People may have questions, and I just want to clarify, because this $200 per day limit has everything to do with this financial warfare where we have frozen the account. It's part of the sanctions. So it's not that that's all that you could organize. That's all that you're allowed to send, period. So just to make that very clear to people.
Right.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to go to Marcia, who has a picture of what the food production situation is there. Marcia?
Yes, maybe what I should start with is the scale of the kind of thing that Farzana just described in and around Herat so movingly. And one way to think about it is 5 months ago, last summer, we had a situation where the nation of Afghanistan, with 38 million people, was already, for many recent years, on what you could call the World Hunger Hotspot map. Picture a map in your mind's eye of places in the world that didn't have enough food as a nation. That would be Haiti or the Democratic Republic of the Congo or Yemen or Syria. And here was Afghanistan, where US and NATO troops were for 2 decades. And it was so wrong and crazy that the nation of Afghanistan was chronically without enough food. So the World Food Program or Oxfam or the Catholic Relief Services would send some extra food because Afghanistan was producing, as a nation, wheat and rice, as well as potatoes. I think we saw some there in the picture. But they were producing less wheat and rice and barley than they needed, and they were able to commercially import from Kazakhstan or Pakistan or Russia or somewhere some extra wheat or rice every year. And then they got aid on top of that. But there was no limitation of their own physical resources. As Farzana implied, there was water underground if you had a well. And Diane said, they have water runoff so that the famous Helmand River, which is a very long river that rises in the mountains of the Hindu Kush in Afghanistan and flows a long way towards Iran. If you could manage that water, dam it up, put it in canals, you could get it where you needed, when you needed it, and grow the crops, especially wheat and rice. But while that started in the 60s, it was stopped later on. That's a different story. However, as of last summer then, that was the situation. I could give you the tonnages, but every year in general, there was maybe 2.5 million tons of wheat and rice coming into the country, either by grants or by commercial purchase. And there was maybe 5 or 6 million tons grown, and it wasn't enough. Well, then what happened? After August and the exit of the United States, NATO, the Taliban government then was in place. But what happened is the crop seasons remained the same, didn't they? But the means of functioning of a country were suddenly stopped because the assets of the nation, almost $9 billion, were frozen abroad, mostly in the US, that you would need to back up your central bank, to back up your currency. And meantime, the kind of cash flow that would come in through the United States and other nations for your budget, that was gone, over half. So as the months went by, 5 months have gone by since August, month after month, the situation is worse and worse. There's no currency for normal trading. There's no credit. So this fall, was the time you should have planted your wheat. You plant winter wheat in the fall and you harvest it next June. And much less winter wheat was planted, much less barley. And this came on top of the fact that last year was dry in Afghanistan. That happens every once in a while. It's associated with weather patterns. In this case, they say La Nina. But anyway, so for a number of reasons, you have less wheat planted last fall. So there's less wheat growing for next spring. And beyond that, it wasn't just people in the cities, like as was described, Kabul or Herat or some of the other cities, but people in the country didn't have food that they grew that was enough to last for the year. That went by. No money for food. Many left their farms. They either tried to sell the land or just had to flee. They're outside of Herat right now, for example. And destitution has increased. So here we are in January of the new year, and another way to put it is only 5% of the population has reliable food. And even then, as Farzana just said, even if you have money, now it's getting to the stage where you can't find it or you can't get it. This is a complete emergency. Now that gives some idea of the physical state of affairs. You could put it another way. As of a year or more ago, if you took the geography of the nation of Afghanistan, you had a few of the 34 provinces that were exceptionally in need of help for food. Now, every single province, 34 province, every single larger city, about 11 larger cities, they are all in need. So this is an historic emergency. So you could say, I'll leave more to some questions and answers, but let me give you the latest updates from this week, because what I'm describing was raised on Tuesday by the United Nations Director for Humanitarian Aid. His name is Martin Griffiths, and he said there's never been a situation on the scale of need as we have in Afghanistan. We need $5 billion from the international community over 2022. And that's the largest amount the United Nations has ever requested for a single nation in need. But it's absolutely urgent. We should get it organized. Then 2 days later, which is yesterday, Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations, he likewise made a special speech saying he called in particular on the United States to relate to this urgency. And he said, here we are in January, he said we have frozen weather conditions and we have frozen assets of this nation, and this can lead to mass death. He used that expression. And he announced that today, Friday, he said yesterday, Friday, he and others, Martin Griffith, were going to meet with the U.S. State Department, meet with Secretary Tony Blinken himself. They were going to have with them today the president of the International Committee of the Red Cross, and they wanted to discuss mobilizing emergency aid. Now, Guterres mentioned in particular, besides food aid, besides fuel aid and shelter aid, not to mention water, as Farzana said, but he said we have to have liquidity in the money system. You have to have some banks open. He said specifically, you have to have the central bank. Now, a reporter said, Director Guterres, what is the duty, the moral duty of the United States? And I hear Guterres pulled back a little and returned to generalities and said, well, we hope to work out with the United States the mechanisms by which we can get the financial and liquidity system functioning again, get the central bank. He didn't say we better do this or else, because it's a moral test of humanity. But that's where we all come in, I think. That's where, in particular, the last couple of years, the Schiller Institute has been sounding the alarm and creating the dialogue and having public and private discussions and mobilization to create the moral pressure to get the mobilization underway, to move in and turn this situation around. Because the summary numbers here are, if you have 38 million people and most of them don't have sufficient and reliable food, you've got what's all the best estimate is over half of that number, 23 million, are definitely headed to die sooner or later from starvation. And and more than that, there's about 9 million who are very near that. The report from people who try and do a good job in the World Food Program is they're sending incredible amounts of specially processed food for very malnourished little children, very malnourished elderly. That there's you can fortify high density biscuits or bars, food bars, and you can make sure that you can eat them without water because the water's unsafe. And there's a peanut paste you can use. Everything is being done like this, but this is no way for a nation to live. This is the emergency we have. And it's a policy and a morality emergency, because I'll just leave off now by saying that there's no physical constraint that caused all this, no big cyclone. And in the last 5 months, there are issues, true, of terrorism or some strife or on the Pakistan border. But what this is a policy of starving a nation by strangling the means for its economy to function. And that's what has to be stopped right away.
Great. Thanks very much, Marcia. I'm sure both of you, when you have questions coming in for Farzana, but we'll go to Joel Dejean, congressional candidate from Texas. Get your thoughts, and then we'll open up the discussion.
Okay, Diane. Those born after Martin Luther King's assassination might assume that he was universally loved and admired by everyone except the hardcore racists and the Klansmen. But on April 4th, 1967, a year to the day before he was assassinated, King gave a speech at the Riverside Church in Upper West Manhattan, where he went after the whole Vietnam War. And the speech, you can find it, it's called Beyond Vietnam. And in the speech, King said that the US military was the greatest purveyor of violence in the world. And he attacked not only the immorality of that, but he also said that the economic hardship caused by the war prevented any hope of dealing with poverty in this country and poverty in the rest of the world. He attacked the neo-colonialism that had become the American policy. Now, I dare say that if King was alive today, he would modify his views just a little bit. And he would say that NATO is the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today. Now, most people think that the acronym for NATO stands for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Actually, it stands for the North Atlantic Terrorist Organization. And if you look at what NATO has done the last 30 years, starting with the first Iraq War, then attacking Serbia, blowing up the Chinese embassy in Belgrade. Then, after 9/11, instead of going after the country that financed and supplied most of the hijackers and was controlling Osama bin Laden, the US under Bush and Cheney, who is now welcomed in the Democratic Party as a true Republican. Cheney, the greatest war criminal in the United States today. They went after Iraq, destroyed Iraq, and in a couple of months, it'll be 19 years in Iraq. We're still there. They went after Syria. They went after Libya. And Hillary flew into Tripoli after the bombing and assassination of Gaddafi. She flew in on her broomstick and said that we came, we saw, and he died. And she proceeded to give that hideous cackle. Now, we didn't stop there. We sent the arms from Libya into Syria. We supported ISIS The US government under Obama and the CIA supported ISIS, created ISIS. To this day, we are still supporting the terrorists against the al-Assad regime in Syria. We went into Afghanistan. We left, as was said, in August, but we left a destroyed country, and now we are starving them to death by withholding the $9 billion in funds being held by the Federal Reserve. The same Federal Reserve that is pumping out $120 to $140 billion every month to bail out the money center banks on Wall Street and to bail out the investment firms and the money market firms like BlackRock, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan. That's where the money is going. And that is causing the hyperinflation. At the same time, we're promoting the Green New Deal, and we're attempting to use the military assets of NATO to enforce this Green New Deal around the world. So what's the problem? The problem is Russia and China are not going along with the program. So as Mr. LaRouche said 10 years ago, after Gaddafi was assassinated, the British Anglo-Dutch system has to destroy Russia and China. That is the policy of NATO. Now, what should we do? As Helga said the other day, we should leave NATO. Germany should leave NATO unless they want to commit suicide by inviting a nuclear war on their territory. France should leave NATO, but the US should reestablish its sovereignty by leaving NATO, and we should join with China in building infrastructure for Afghanistan, building water projects, building power projects, setting up the railroads so it can become part of the Belt and Road. And we should do that type of construction around the world, in Haiti, in Panama, all over South and Central America. And what we should do is take control of this corrupt, greedy Federal Reserve System. As I said in a recent statement, the head of the Dallas Federal Reserve, Robert Kaplan, was forced to resign because he was using his insider influence to invest in mortgage-backed securities and stocks. So he was forced to resign, but Jay Powell is doing the same thing. The whole Federal Reserve System has to be converted into a third national bank to provide low interest, long-term credit for great infrastructure projects like the North American Water and Power Alliance, like high-speed rail, like water management we need here in Houston. And we should finance the space program. Artemis should be fully financed, and we should accelerate the fusion program, the thermonuclear fusion program that has made recent breakthroughs here in the United States and in China. That's what we should be spending our money into. And for those who think it's impossible, I want to remind people of the Christmas launch of the James Webb Telescope, Space Telescope, with 14 countries collaborating over 5 years and spending a measly $10 billion to put that wonderful piece of equipment up there. Now, it turns out the lead contractor of the Webb Telescope is Northrop Grumman. So you have a major defense contractor involved in the space telescope. Lockheed Martin builds space probes. All of the defense contractors could be converted almost overnight to infrastructure, space, fusion, and the program. That's what we should be doing. That's what I'm calling for in my congressional campaign. And the reason I'm running as a LaRouche Independent is because the Democratic and Republican parties are brain dead, just like NATO is brain dead. They have no solution except war. You have these warmongers in the Democratic Party like Robert Menendez and Ted Cruz here in Texas, who haven't found the country they're not willing to sanction or attack. But these fools don't realize that if you attack Russia and China, they have the means to hit back. And if we keep this road that we're on in Ukraine and in Taiwan, we're not going to have just a conventional war. We're going to have a nuclear war which could annihilate the entire human race. And I don't know anybody who has a living brain cell in their head who think that that's a good idea. So I'll stop there and see if there are any questions.
Great, thank you. Well, I'll say a bunch of questions that have come in, and also we have some people watching, which reminded me of one thing I wanted to mention, because some people are commenting absolutely what a horror this is in Afghanistan, and something has to be done immediately. We can't wait until the winter is over, when people are freezing and starving. I went to the Bronx yesterday, and I'd been there a couple days earlier, right after this terrible fire in the apartment building in which 17 people died. And I say this because Americans get very confused. They say, oh, we're helping other people overseas. Why don't we help people in the US? Or we're not helping people overseas, but things are terrible in the US. No, we have the same policy, the same indifference within the United States and as a foreign policy. So what I saw in the Bronx reminded me very much of what happened in Queens, which we have discussed on this program a few times, where people drowned in their basement in a flood, which was completely predictable, which was known that the infrastructure would fail in heavy rain, and absolutely nothing was done about it. In this case, this building had many violations. The people were using space heaters because they had no heat. And after the fire, unbelievably, what I learned at the press conference is that the families who had been moved out into hotels where they're putting entire families in one room, and they're saying it's a little hard to sleep with 5 people in the same bed. One entire household now has COVID because they're all in this one room together, but the hotels aren't being paid. So they're throwing them out of the hotels. And now they're saying you're going to have to go to a homeless shelter or go back into the building, which is still filled with smoke, still doesn't have heat. I mean, can you imagine? So the point is, everything has to change. And Helga Zepp-LaRouche had said of Afghanistan that, in a sense, it was an opportunity for the United States, Russia, China, and all the nations in the region, Pakistan, Tajikistan, Iran, everybody there is affected. India, which is farther away, but nonetheless has a close relationship to Afghanistan. For these nations, particularly the US, Russia, China, to put aside their differences and to say, none of us wants a place where millions of people starve to death, where you create conditions where they want to go back to producing opium, or they decide they're so desperate that they're going to sell the weapons that the US left there to every splinter group imaginable. Nobody should want that situation. Therefore, why not collaborate to ensure that Afghanistan has a modern healthcare system with, and what does that mean, a modern healthcare system? It means you need clean water, you need electricity, you need decent nutrition, and you work. I think Farzana can also tell us more, because you were describing, during this occupation with women becoming educated and so on. I think you have a very rich potential in the population of skilled people, of scientists and others who would be capable of building the nation if we had a policy to do so. So I'll just tell you some of the questions that have come in and people can jump in. One person is very excited about the wells that you're building and is asking, did you have to get a license? How does that work? How much does it cost per well? Another person is asking, what can we do right now immediately to stop this famine, this disaster? And then others are writing in about the history of Ibn Sina, or Avicenna, the great genius whose at least his father was born in Afghanistan, and where he came from is somewhat disputed, but this region produced one of the leading founders of modern medicine. Um, so those are some of what's happened. But Farzana, do you want to respond to any of
Yes,
that?
I definitely can say something to that, right? I had another information from my cousin also. He went to the bank at 5 a.m. in the morning and he was able to enter to the bank at 12 noon. So people waiting a big line in front of every bank and waiting to enter. The best way is really to help them is to let the bank run like the way before it was in Afghanistan. So at least people like us here all over the world, I think Afghan family trying to help their family in the countries, and that would be the best way to help them in that way. First of all, first when the money comes into the country, then we can plan different things. My another goal is to build schools, especially in Afghanistan, for women separated totally from man, so that they can allow women to study. That's another goal of mine. So in the future to do, but first of all, right now they need water, and they needed water the whole many years, and we tried to help as much as we could. But now we're trying to. I try to send money there, which I collected the donation on from generous donors that funded to the Farzana Foundation, and we are just I'm just waiting to see how fast soon hopefully the bank system comes back and work so people can collect their monies, and that's the hardest part at the moment.
Well, it's certainly a major disruption if you can't even transfer currency and everything is frozen. Obviously,
Right.
that's urgent. And I think most Americans have absolutely no idea that our government and our Federal Reserve has frozen this. Marcia, you have some thoughts?
Well, I'll just say that speaking in most Americans have no idea. Isn't this blackout of the news severe? If you take a lot of American farm families, and they're in communities with schools because of the COVID-19, everything is disrupted. But nobody knows that millions have been forced in a situation in Afghanistan and elsewhere to not have food. So what by not by the major mainstream media blacking everything out, it deprives of any ordinary person here in this country from the right to do something, from the right to act in a moral way, because they don't know what's going on. So among the things that can be done is individuals, however they have an opportunity, can break the blackout with their own letters to the editor or their own networks that they have, unless they're a complete hermit, they know people, and say this just can't go on. This is the kind of thing Farzana just described. This is the reality, and it's intolerable that goes on. And that backs up, that creates a situation where we're not observers to what might have happened today. I don't know what happened between the United Nations director and Tony Blinken. I don't know, but we're not observers. We have to create the circumstance, as Joel Dejean is doing and running for office, to make this an urgent, to break the blackout, and then that's the gateway to action.
That's right. Another
Joel?
question was about the
Oh,
water
go ahead.
wells, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
So the water wells, they have the permission to actually build water wells. This is very easy to get there in Afghanistan because people really need that. And so when they have the money, it's $2,500 build a water wells, and so that's what we put together at the moment, and try to my team in Afghanistan, there are like 10, 15 people around that, and they help together and put this together. Mostly my uncle, he's the one who has managed everything on the construction, and the money wise, the finance part of it, my cousin, he take care of it. And they are building it. It took 2 weeks maybe each water wells, and they are just to honor people who donated. They created a marble plaque and printed the name of a specific donors here in the United States, their name, and which they take pictures and send it to me, and I posted it on the FarzanaFoundation.com, my website, and also videos that he actually taking from all the children's and water wells and everything else we do there. But first of all, it would be amazing if I would be able to just walk to the bank tomorrow morning and send this money that I collected for them to save life. I would be able at the moment right now at least to build 15 water wells from the people actually donated in the December before Christmas.
Right.
And
So
I'm
at this
actually very
point, you
happy that but there's no opportunity for me to send him. $200 doesn't really help, and he has to wait there 7 hours to get into the bank to collect the money. So I just don't know how to do it. And my cousin said, just wait. So wait until they die. They're selling little girls to adult men. Like this is, of course, religion has a big effect in Afghanistan, the Muslim religion. People believe in it. And so there has to be some kind of opportunity for people to try to live first their life and be able to eat and live, and then we can build. And my goal was for the last 30 years of my life, because I was a girl and I didn't have a lot of rights on my own. I got arranged married, and I know how it is for an Afghan woman. And so I always wanted to think, when I grow up and when I have the opportunity, I would love to build a lot of schools in Herat City for women, to educate them, just to have something. I was the first Afghan girl in my family in Germany with the driver license. We are not allowed to even drive bicycles, like anything. There's no rights to women. And it's the worst country and the most dangerous place on earth to live as a woman. They are really abusing women in a worse way that we cannot even imagine. Women are not allowed to have nail polish. If they have nail polish and they would see it, they would cut their fingers. It's not like it is, we cannot imagine, because I get all these messages and news from Afghanistan live every day through WhatsApp, FaceTime. Plus, the service is a little bad through WhatsApp. You can do that if they don't have an iPhone. And we talk with them and I see them, and it breaks my heart, because I'm a woman and I have 3 daughters on myself, and I grew up in that culture. Of course, after I was 14, 15, I grew up in Germany, but I still have a lot of part of it. I lived in war 2 years in Afghanistan. I know how it is to live in a war and to be a child. And it's really, really bad. And it's, when you think about it, any country was war 6, 7, 8, 9 years. Afghanistan has war now for 40 years. It never has stopped. And the country has so many things that we can build in this country, but they're damaging the country, and now they're killing Afghans, and they want Afghans to die. And it's the saddest things that I'm experiencing, and it's making me disappointed, because I was so excited right now. Now I have the foundation and nonprofit organization that I built it and everything, and now people say, "Oh, we're here, we want to help." And we cannot. We're just sitting here, and it's very, very sad for me, because these people are, they are my family. Not only the people who are helping me with this building, this construction, they are. When you go on my website, one of the videos that I have uploaded there, they're speaking about me, and they just don't have any another hope. They try to call me every day, and I said, I try to, as much as I can, I would try to help. I mean, if any possibility would be for us. Um, I really enjoyed listening to you guys, and I totally agree with everything, Joe and Diane. I admire you guys taking all this time and opportunities to speak about this. I'm very thankful for that. Thank you.
well, thank you. I think it has to also be said that people are, it's very hypocritical to say that since the Taliban doesn't respect women's rights, we're going to shut down all of the money and starve everyone to death. In other words, that is not a solution to get women to have rights, is to then starve them to death. And
That's
this
right.
is the line that's been taken by the State Department. Well, if you support women's rights, do they have the right to go to a doctor? Do they have the right to eat or have electricity or have, I mean, it really, so I'm glad that you brought that up because people have to think differently. And I think that if you change the relationship among these major powerful nations, we would have a way to help change the situation there. Now, I have a whole bunch of comments, and then Joel probably has some more things to say. Um, Someone says, if we don't act now to release the funds, aren't we showing that we are complicit with genocide? As Marcia said, this is our moral obligation. We can't ignore this any longer. And then someone else writes, does Syria recently joining the Belt and Road point toward a breaking point in the US ability to unilaterally impose these kind of sanctions? In other words, are people going to be able to break free of the sanctions because people are breaking from the United States? And then someone else, Farzana, wants you to get on news station 124. Maybe you're familiar with it, Arab news in the New York area, because they want you to talk about what you're doing. But Joel, maybe you have some other thoughts on all of this.
Yeah, the first right is the right to life. If you're not alive, education is not going to go very far. And we have to really go after the phony Christians in the United States who claim to be Christians and are allowing an entire nation to be starved to death. And we have to tell any fool in Ukraine who thinks that NATO is going to save them, just look at what's going on in Afghanistan. That's what NATO brings to your country: starvation, death, lack of sovereignty. And the same thing is occurring all over Europe. So we have to wake up and say that all these words, democracy, human rights, they've been used by the West to spread genocide. And this hypocrisy accusing China of causing genocide in Xinjiang. Well, I don't think the Chinese are starving the Uyghurs to death in Xinjiang. I don't think providing infrastructure and jobs is genocide. But what the U.S., what Blinken, what Jake Sullivan, and what Biden is tolerating in Afghanistan is exactly what we condemned the Nazis for in Nuremberg.
Yep. So we have to change it. And I will just say that in that sermon from Martin Luther King, he talks about the Montgomery bus boycott. And many people know something about the bus boycott. They know it started because Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat in the front and move to the back of the bus. But they don't realize that that boycott, where the African American people in Montgomery did not take the bus until the segregation was ended, went on for an entire year. And people endured incredible hardship because they had to figure out how to get to work. And the city of Montgomery would thwart them at every turn, like Black-owned taxi companies started a program where they would carpool people to work and they would only charge them a dime. Whatever they were paying for the bus, they would charge them for the cab. So they did that for a while, but then the town made that illegal. So they weren't allowed to do that. Then people organized different kinds of carpools. And you can imagine Montgomery, thank God, is not as cold as Buffalo, New York, but they have pretty muddy and rainy and snowy weather. And what came about, as King describes in the sermon, was the city was going to outlaw carpooling altogether. And then people were going to have to trudge 5 miles, 6 miles. How are they going to get to work? And King describes his fear giving the sermon that night to tell people that they expected they were going to be dealt a terrible blow the following day, but they couldn't give up. They had to continue. And so he said he could feel the pessimism coming in that night when he told people about that. And the next morning he went to court, and their lawyers gave a great, they fought hard, but he could see that the judge for the city was going to rule for the city that the carpools were illegal. And then just at that moment, there was this big commotion, and someone came in and said, oh, we've got a message from Washington. Well, the message was the Supreme Court had just ruled that bus segregation was illegal. So just at the moment where it looked like the entire thing, that they were going to be broken, they got the breakthrough that turned everything around. But I would say this is not magic. I think that there's hard work, really hard work, and then there's faith that justice has to prevail if you have put in everything that you can put into the fights. Of course, partly why I joined into campaigns and of myself going up against Schumer, CIA, and everything that's in these homes. Can I still be heard, by the way?
Yes.
You gotta
What?
break it up there.
I can?
Yes,
Okay.
I heard.
Yeah, I just thought, oh, good. Okay. That you could say it's like David versus Goliath, but David got good advice and had a very well-placed slingshot. And I think in moments like this, there's something powerful about telling the truth. So I just wanted to say that to everyone who's listening. Don't despair, but do everything you can. In fact, given that it's Martin Luther King weekend, I would really urge everybody to do one thing to get the truth out about Afghanistan. Write a letter to the newspaper, call your congressman, go hold the picket sign in front of the New York Federal Reserve. Whatever we can do, we should break this. Clearly, the pressure is building, as Marcia said. We don't know why Blinken and Gutierrez decided to have this discussion, but I think they're getting afraid that the truth will come out and they are going to have the blood of 9 million people on their hands who are going to starve in the very near future, not to mention 23 million. I would also say that tomorrow morning, for especially younger people, Helga LaRouche is having a symposium on Ibn Sina, on Avicenna, which is at 11 a.m. And you can register at the schillerinstitute.com. And then on Monday, on Martin Luther King, the birthday holiday, also at 11 a.m., is going to be an international symposium on this topic. And I can say that Helga LaRouche is extremely determined that during her watch, we are not going to allow this crime to occur, but we have to act. It doesn't take long to die of malnutrition and dehydration. We don't have forever on this. So those are my thoughts, but does anyone, we're going to wrap up soon. Do any of you have words? Yes. Yeah.
I have one word that I want to share to the American and United States, anybody who sees this. There is something from United States in Afghanistan. Every weapon in Afghanistan, when you look at it, the Taliban owns is made in USA. Maybe they should not build this weapon and send it to poor countries like Afghanistan and give to the people who are uneducated and religion pollute the brain and manipulated the brain that just kill each other. That would be a good thing in the world to do, to just have less war and more peace in the world. And people should support that. We all went through the lockdown and Corona, and a lot of people died in the United States. And it was a big topic. There, day by day, they bombarded schools with children died. They shouldn't study. So maybe America should help build less weapon and do the business through other businesses. It's for me, it seems to me for many years, I have right now the first time in my life to talk about it in public. It's very painful to actually see this, and people kill each other. Of course, they're not civilized like we are, and it's very hard to communicate with them. But I would have the opportunity, and I did have the opportunity. I did talk to them once, to the Taliban, to my cousin. I asked him if I can talk to them, if we are able to build these water wells, and they said you can build that. They give us the permission. But so slowly we have to educate these people. When we leave them like that and don't help them and don't give them food and make them to have a hate against us in the Western culture, that's just not fair to them, and not only Christians, anybody in the world should try to help and support and maybe open their eyes. What happening actually in Afghanistan is the worst place to be a woman. And I feel so much for this because I'm an Afghan woman and I'm proud to be an Afghan woman. And maybe you should building less weapon and sell this to Afghanistan, millions. They are having the weapon in the hand, but at the end of the day, they just don't understand it. They're powerful. They think, oh, I have a weapon. Oh, I can kill someone. So they make them to kill themselves with the American weapon.
Right. A very good point. Anything
Thank
else,
you.
Marcia?
Well, I just say that I think I'm glad you raised the opportunity. Anyone listening, please take it to listen to the history of this famous figure, Ibn Sina, tomorrow. Diane mentioned how you can sign up to do that. But just what Farzana says about what we should be doing. I mean, it's been hard to sleep while you read about how much food is not there in Afghanistan and people without food. But at the same time, so many things about your country, Farzana, I so enjoy. For example, I find potato growing in that one province, Bamiyan, where if they had a
Bamia.
lot more, yeah, there would be a lot more. One province raises 50 to 70% of all the potatoes in Afghanistan, and the whole idea of instead of building weapons, you have the Idaho people who could go
Right.
in and like you
Mhm.
build wells, you could take the best potatoes. And by the way, China has just developed the great advance that you can plant potatoes by seed instead of by a piece of potato, which is the way you've done it for thousands of years. So you could there is if we fight to stop this absolute injustice, immorality, and intolerable
Yes.
situation, at the same time think of working together, have the fun and pleasure to rebuild. It isn't just the hugest dams, which we should have, like the Helmand River. It's a terrific water valley for all of Central Asia, but also just the water in this one potato province, Bamiyan, where you could just have a few small aqueducts and take the water from the highlands and get it where you need it. And suddenly you'd have a zillion potatoes. That's just the kind of thing we should think about.
That's true.
Great.
Well,
Joel, any
Potatoes.
thoughts?
I do agree that we should stop exporting weapons, not just to Afghanistan, but to Saudi Arabia, Ukraine, and we should re-employ the defense industry to build infrastructure and high-speed rail and revive the space program and the fusion program in this country. And one thing I do want to say, after Martin Luther King gave that speech attacking Vietnam, he was not widely loved. He was attacked by the New York Times, the Washington Post, Lyndon Johnson. Some of the civil rights leaders said, "What are you doing getting involved in foreign policy and economics?" But at the same time, Martin Luther King was saying that we have to revive the real economy, quit with this war economy. Lyndon LaRouche in '68 was beginning to build his movement, which has laid out over the last 50 plus years the method of how we could rebuild the economy and rebuild not just the US, but the world, and eventually use some of those potatoes on Mars or beyond. That's what we should be doing.
That's right.
Great. Well, thank
That
you
would be great.
very much, all of you. Thank you, Farzana, for sharing with us. I didn't know this was your debut as a public speaker. You did great. I hope you do
That's
more.
first time, yeah. Learning. I have to learn. Thank you so much.
Yes, no, you're a powerful advocate. So I hope everyone who is listening will help us get the word out on this take action. We don't have time. And as many of you can, tomorrow morning and also Monday at 11 a.m. on the schillerinstitute.com. And thank you so much. And I will see everyone next Friday.
Yes.